Well, welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video. So today I wanted to just compare some CGC 9.8 comic books and talk about some of the techniques that I use when I'm comparing similar CGC 9.8 comic books, because I think a lot of times when you're out there trying to buy CGC 9.8 books, there's maybe 3 or 4 to consider that are kind of similar. So the way I kind of set it up in this video was I have 3 separate comparisons I want to do, but each comparison has 4 books, CGC 9.8 comic books in the comparisons, and they're all kind of related together. And I think a lot of times, when you do these comparisons, the hope is that one kind of sticks out as maybe, oh, it looks pretty rare on the census in the CGC 9.8, but the price might be maybe a little bit lower than some of its sort of immediate competition kind of thing. So let's get right into the first compare here. It's one book I got out of the comparison, and yeah, kind of the others I actually really want. But the first book is, and I'll put up the comparison data right away here, but the first book's Guardians of the Galaxy #1 from 2008. The first new team Guardians of the Galaxy. Second book we got Incredible Hulk 449, first Thunderbolts appearance. I also got a Young Avengers #1, the first appearance of all the Young Avengers. And Annihilation Conquest #6, which predates this and is sort of when the new team Guardians of the Galaxy forms. So this is obviously like my team book comparison here. So let's take a look on the census for all these books in the CGC 9.8. So this Guardians of the Galaxy one here, kind of on the record as really liking it. So there's 163 out there in the CGC 9.8. And the CGC 9.8 ratio is 23.4%. So of all graded copies, 23.4% of them are CGC 9.8. And that is, I've been on the record as saying, a really rare, low ratio for a 2008 book. Anything after the 2000s, I mean, everyone was putting their books in a bag and board and taking care of their books. So you don't really see, low 20s in, these modern books. So one that kind of stuck out to me, and I was really wanting to compare it to a couple other books, and there's Hulk 449, there's 363 CGC 9.8s, and 34.5% is the CGC 9.8 ratio on that one. We're going to talk price of all these books, and I want to have the price in the stats below as well. For Young Avengers #1, there's 760 CGC 9.8, so this got really popular when all these Avengers books were coming out, obviously. And 62.9% of them are CGC 9.8s, though, so not very rare in a CGC 9.8 for that book. And Annihilation Conquest, 107 CGC 9.8s, and 51.7% is the CGC 9.8 ratio. So I think the gist of all this is, when you consider the prices of some of these books, Young Avengers and Hulk 449, Young Avengers going for about 200 to 250 right now. You get a good deal on that book, it's 200. Like, you don't really see any go below that for Young Avengers #1. And Incredible Hulk 449, great cover, and a really good deal on that I think is around 250. You see a lot of those going for over 250 basically, sort of in between the 250 to 300 range. So the Annihilation Conquest and Guardians of the Galaxy #1, those books kind of stick out in this comparison here because, especially the Guardians of the Galaxy #1, you get kind of the origin and what's known as sort of the first full appearance of the new team Guardians of the Galaxy in this book here. And this book, I purchased one of mine for $190, and the other one was like $160 something, like low 60s. And in general, in the last year here, definitely could get this book, like the fair market value, right around $175, I would say, for this book in the last year. And when you look at Young Avengers and Hulk being, in the 200s handily, but not as rare in the CGC 9.8, I think when you do the compare, this one kind of sticks out on this comparison. And even Annihilation Conquest, there's only 107 in the CGC 9.8, so it's kind of a pretty rare collector item in that way. 51.7%, so it's more rare than Young Avengers, which is, I think a book that has really taken off here, and I think there's potential for that one to really kind of get down to like the $150 level probably once sort of MCU Avengers is really done. Maybe long term there's some more potential with that book though, but I think that's going, I was looking on completed listings, 200 to 250 for that one, whereas Annihilation Conquest, it's more rare in the CGC 9.8, There's less of them on the census, and it's like 120 to 150 is all the completed listings for Annihilation Conquest number 6 lately. I think there's one online right now. It's like $140, and I don't have this book, and I've really thought of buying that $140 one many times. So yeah, those other two key issues, they got great covers, and but I think the first new team Guardians of the Galaxy first appearances do kind of stand out when you do these comparisons with kind of lower CGC 9.8 ratios in general. Like with this book, it's a 2008 book. For Hulk 449, that's like a 1995 book, I believe. Forget the year exactly on that one, but obviously a way older book, but it's not as rare in the CGC 9.8 as Guardians of the Galaxy First New Team, with that 34.5% CGC 9.8 ratio. This one, 23.4%. The lower the better. Of all graded copies, 23.4% of CGC 9.8s of all graded copies are CGC 9.8 for this Guardians of the Galaxy number 1. That's really low and nice and rare. And yeah, for this being a much newer book than that Hulk 449, yet still being more rare, is an interesting thing. And again, it does stick out for me for modern books, and I've talked about that on previous videos. Alright, we'll get into the second compare here. So the second compare is Amazing Spider-Man 300. So origin, first full appearance of Venom, and classic Todd McFarlane cover. New Mutants 98, first Deadpool, Gideon, Copycat, classic, early 90s, probably the key issue in the 90s to get, certainly from a Marvel perspective, I think. Also, a Batman, The Dark Knight Returns. This is the first Carrie Kelly, so the first girl Robin, and also kind of just a classic Batman book. It's almost the modern interpretation of Batman, the first new modern interpretation of Batman. Where he's like just a complete badass. So it's almost like the first new modern Batman. And then Batman Adventures 12 I really want to talk about on this list too. So I got all the stats below there. And, what kind of sticks out from this compare, Amazing Spider-Man 300 with that 5.8% CGC 9.8 ratio. So of all graded copies, only 5.8% of them are CGC 9.8s. That's extremely low for a late 80s book. It's even extremely low for like a late 70s book, to be honest. Like, it's just a book that really sticks out as being extremely rare in the 9.8. Plus, you get such an iconic origin and first appearance. So that's why it's really expensive. Yeah, for price for Amazing Spider-Man 300, it's like $1,750 up to $2,000 in there in the CGC 9.8, depending on kind of, the eye appeal of the covers and how deep the colors are as well. So New Mutants 98, obviously not as expensive as Amazing Spider-Man 300, and the reason why, that CGC 9.8 ratio, 20%. So compared to Amazing Spider-Man 300, not nearly as rare at all. Like, the lower the better, again, with these CGC 9.8 ratios. So New Mutants 98, of all graded copies, 20% of them are CGC 9.8s. On the census, too, because this is an early 90s book, printing really just blew up in the early 90s. That was like the top peak of printing ever in books, basically. And then the internet started to come after that, and printing just took a dive after sort of the early 90s. So 3,145 New Mutants 98s, which I've mentioned in the past is a bit of a negative toward the book, being that from a collector perspective, like, you want less, not more of something. And early 90s books are very well printed. Batman The Dark Knight Returns. So, for New Mutants 98 being about $700, you could clearly see, if that CGC 9.8 ratio was like 8%, New Mutants 98 would be neck and neck with Amazing Spider-Man 300, I think, just based on sort of popularity of the first appearances. Batman The Dark Knight Returns, though, excuse me, there's 548 CGC 9.8 to this one, 18% is the CGC 9.8 ratio. And for DC Batman books, that's a pretty low CGC 9.8 ratio. You just don't see that, these like super low single-digit CGC 9.8 ratios in DC books in the 80s. So that is actually pretty low, relatively speaking. Price for this one, about, I've saw auctions lately for about $630. And I think for a really, really nice one in a nice new case with no scuffs on the case or anything, because it is kind of a simple cover, paying up to $700 for that one is something I would pretty much do. Yeah, for a really nice one. Gotta be really nice though. Some of the scuffed up cases, they'll go for around $500. Like, it's really kind of one of those books where it ranges a lot. Batman Adventures 12, 14.8% CGC 9.8 ratio. This is a 90s book, so it's more rare than New Mutants 98, and that shows in the price. There was an auction just in the last couple of weeks here for 1,600 area. I think it was 1,590 something I might have went for. So I think that's about the fair price for Batman Adventures 12 right now. More rare than New Mutants 98. It is a 90s book, Batman Adventures 12. So, you know, with New Mutants 98 being about $700, let's call it $750, I think is a good price. And it's, you know, Batman Adventures 12 being more rare than New Mutants 98, 1,600. That's because that CGC 9.8 ratio is a little bit lower. And, you know, I think maybe Deadpool's more popular than Harley Quinn, but this sort of group to compare was these big classic first appearances, I think, that for each sort of classic iconic character, like Batman, Deadpool, Spider-Man with Venom. And yeah, so in this list, you know, it's hard to go against. I mean, it's the most expensive, but it's hard to go against Amazing Spider-Man 300 at all. I think in the 80s, it's always going to be like the most expensive book in the CGC 9.8 because of that 5.8% CGC 9.8 ratio. Mix it in with an iconic origin and first appearance of Venom, like one of the most popular, you know, characters and anti-heroes now. As I've mentioned in the past videos, he's almost like the first anti-hero ever in comic books. So hard to go against not picking that one out of this group, but you can kind of understand this group. Maybe, you know, maybe Batman The Dark Knight Returns with that 18% CGC 9.8 ratio doesn't look that good on the surface, but I think compared to Batman books, that's pretty rare. And maybe, you know, for around $600 in that one, that's probably the undervalued one out of this group. Thinking that, wow, that could maybe go for $800 or $900 because it's such a classic book. And maybe because that CGC 9.8 ratio is not as low, because it's a DC Batman book, you might get excused for that a little bit. But yeah, out of that group, hard to go against Amazing Spider-Man 300. Next group is the sort of modern mega key issue comparison group. So I got an NYX number 3, and in this group, all I have is the Ultimate Fallout 4. So we got 4 books to compare though. NYX number 3. Oh, I do have the Batman Beyond number 1. I forgot to bring that out, actually. I'm just realizing that now, out of this group. NYX number 3, though. Edge of Spider-Verse number 2, first Spider-Gwen. NYX number 3 is the first X-23. Ultimate Fallout number 4, first Miles Morales, new Spider-Man. And Batman Beyond number 1 is the first Batman Beyond. So these are kind of all sort of modern, pretty modern mega keys. Batman Beyond being $19.99, but I thought I'd still add it in here. So out of this group, if we have a look, the lowest CGC 9.8 ratio is Ultimate Fallout 4. So yeah, 32%, which means Ultimate Fallout 4 is the most rare in the CGC 9.8, you know, out of this group. And I've done this sort of comparison on past videos with Edge of Spider-Verse 2 and NYX number 3, thinking that maybe they were a little bit overvalued, and Ultimate Fallout 4 was kind of the one to get because first appearance of Miles Morales, Spider-Man, so iconic, mixed in with it being the most rare. And for a while there, like 5 months ago, let's call it, Ultimate Fallout 4 was less money than Edge of Spider-Verse, and is still less money than NYX number 3. To me, it always stuck out. For this kind of comparison, that's kind of, I was doing it back then, it stuck out as one to buy around $350. Now, maybe this book's about $450 to $500. The last completed listing on eBay was $550. So it'll be interesting to see if that holds, but I think probably more 500-ish to 450 to 500 is more fair once maybe some of the stimulus check hype kind of slows down a bit. But out of this comparison, yeah, it's really easy to kind of focus in on Ultimate Fallout 4 because I think Edge of Spider-Verse number 2 and NYX number 3, although great big first appearances as well, I think Ultimate Fallout 4 is just as big of a first appearance. Like, you take out the fact that, you know, they're female superheroes or male superheroes, whatever it might be. If you just, you know, look at them individually, I think they're pretty much equal in, like, iconic first appearance. So, for me, it's just what book is more rare in the CGC 9.8, and that one should probably be the highest price. So, with NYX number 3, there was a completed listing in the CGC 9.8. It was $750 that it went for. I think that is a price target for Ultimate Fallout 4. I think eventually, over the next 2-3 years here, I think every now and then you see an NYX number 3 go for about $650. So I think $650 to $750 could be sort of maybe an optimistic price target for Ultimate Fallout 4. Because, yeah, with 32% CGC 9.8 ratio, NYX's is 40%, so it's not as rare in the CGC 9.8. Plus, there's, about 100 less almost in the Ultimate Fallout 4 than NYX number 3, so there's a little bit less out there. From that perspective, it's a better collector item as well. And yeah, you know what, Edge of Spider-Verse, I remember doing this comparison kind of 4 or 5 months ago myself, and that always stuck out as well. I think that's a bit overvalued, so I think, you know, maybe Edge of Spider-Verse can stick around about $400 to $450 here. I think there is maybe some kind of maybe even pushing $500 now in this environment, but I think Edge can kind of stick around the, you know, 400 area, and then Ultimate Fallout 4 because it's more rare, it looks better on the senses. And Edge of Spider-Verse 2, 59% of them are CGC 9.8, so that's not rare at all. So I think that is kind of a fair value, about $400, let's call it. Where Ultimate Fallout 4 could catch up to NYX number 3, and I think a price target could be $650 to $750 in the next, 2 years-ish. I don't think it's going to get there anywhere soon, and that is being a bit optimistic. Batman Beyond number 1's a bit of an outlier, and yeah, I can't believe I forgot to bring mine out in this list. I kind of added it, I think, sort of right near the end. But with only 183 CGC 9.8s compared to all these other books that are really popular Marvel books, it certainly flies under the radar from that perspective. But great, you know, if you got one of these, a 1 of 183, I have 2 in the CGC 9.8, so that feels great. I have 2 of 183. And 37.5% is a CGC 9.8 ratio. So of all graded copies, yeah, 37.5%. That's lower than NYX number 3, and it's lower than Edge of Spider-Verse number 2. So from that perspective, again, you know, maybe Batman Beyond could catch up to NYX number 3, and actually in price, I've had a couple people message me from on the team and saying they're paying over $600 for this in the last week or two. And, you know, certainly in the last 6 months, many had paid like $550, $569.99 was some of the completed listings that you saw. The lowest I saw was in an auction about maybe 6 months ago now, and that was $475 for a Batman Beyond number 1, the CGC 9.8 in the first print, kind of the first print UPC code version. So, I mean, that is, you know, one I would recommend kind of neck and neck with Ultimate Fallout 4, I guess, over Edge of Spider-Verse 2 and NYX number 3. And it really has nothing to do with them being female superheroes. It's just looking at the data, looking at the statistics, and just seeing that, Batman Beyond Ultimate Fallout 4, a little more rare in the CGC 9.8, a little less of them, and then in some cases, even less price. So kind of just everything matches up to say that maybe they're a little bit more undervalued. Okay, so 3 comparisons there. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of just talk about the books, talk about how they look on the CGC census, and then compare them to the price. And this is what I think is a good practice to do when you're going out looking to buy CGC 9.8 comic books. A lot of times there might be 2 to 3 of them that you're considering, and even if they're not related to each other, it just makes sense to do this comparison. You know, like how much money have they been selling for? If you're buying CGC 9.8s, you know, how many are there on the census, and what's the CGC 9.8 ratio, because that's just a measure of the rarity of that CGC 9.8 comic book. So, and the lower the better for the CGC 9.8 ratio. So, just a really helpful thing to do, and, you know, even if, it's good to know, like say I really wanted a Young Avengers number 1, which is kind of the books that maybe doesn't look the best here because it's not really rare in the CGC 9.8, and it's more expensive than a Guardians of the Galaxy number 1, which is really rare and still has a great, cool first appearance. So, but, you know, if I wanted something like that, at least you still know. You know that, hey, this one's not very rare, but it's just cool, and maybe I'll be extra patient on that and wait for the lower end of the fair market value, which would be about, you know, $200 for that book. Whereas, yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy number 1, it being so rare, a lot more rare than Young Avengers number 1, I think it could get over 200 and sort of get into that Young Avengers price range where they're selling for $250, and even over $250. Some of them were going for sort of during Avengers Endgame and things like that. But just a really helpful exercise, yeah, to really kind of identify some underfollowed books maybe, but to just know what you're getting into, I think, is one of the better things. Because, yeah, I purchased books just because I like the cover. And, again, that's the thing with Young Avengers 1. Not very rare, but the cover's great, and I still want it. Like, so, it's just because a book looks really good on the census, you still have to compare it to its price, and it might, the price might not be high because the cover's not as cool. So there's a lot of really factors you got to consider, but still a really good practice to make this comparison. Yeah, especially if you're right into CGC 9.8 books. These are the comparisons that you need to make to, just know what you're buying and understand some of these prices. Like, a lot of people think, oh, Amazing Spider-Man, how is that worth it? And CGC 9.8, like, I'd never pay $2,000 for that. But there's not another book in the 80s that has a 5.8% CGC 9.8 ratio. That has this iconic first appearance. So yeah, Amazing Spider-Man 300 just has everything. So it's one of those books that deserves to be the most expensive CGC 9.8 of the 80s. And except, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 first print, or I'm sure there's some obscure book I'm missing, but good to do these comparisons though, and just stay right on top of the facts and know what you're buying, and you end up kind of identifying some underfollow. This is how I've sort of identified. Yeah, again, going through finding out Ultimate Fallout 4 was, I thought, undervalued 6 months ago. And wow, the prices just moved up basically $200 from $350 to one selling on eBay for $550 in the last week. So in the CGC 9.8. So yeah, I think there's a sort of it works. Like, yeah, there's kind of a method to it, and I think doing these comparisons is, if you're a big CGC 9.8 collector, I don't think too many people do it, and you can definitely kind of gain that edge. And I think I have with some of my buys because a lot of times I just really like a book, and then I look on the census and compare it to its other books, and I know that happened with Guardians of the Galaxy #1, and just got really excited when it looks a lot better on the census to some other books that are going for a lot more money. And I think those are the kind of opportunities you're looking for in the books to identify. All right, enough blabbering on here. If you haven't already, I'd invite you to join the team and subscribe to Team CGC 9.8. Yeah, I'd love to have you on our comic book collecting and comic book investing team. Hit the bell to get all the latest notifications for videos, and add me on Instagram and Twitter as well. Okay, great video here that I think I was kind of blabbering on in the middle there, but I just wanted to have these comparisons up and show them to you guys and give you kind of my method that I like to look at CGC 9.8 through, my sort of prism through, and just to understand them a little bit better and to identify maybe a couple undervalued books. So thanks for watching as always, and thanks for all the comments and messages, and yeah, send me messages on Instagram too. Having some great conversations on Instagram with a lot of people on the team that are actively buying, and yeah, it's always great fun to talk with some people that are buying. So yeah, any messages at all, let me know on Instagram. But thanks so much for watching today, and I'll see you on the next video.